The first thing Claire Voss noticed about Millstone was the quiet, not the peaceful kind, the kind that meant nobody here was in a hurry, and nobody thought you should be either. She'd driven 2 hours from Pittsburgh with a folder of workforce audit forms on the passenger seat, a deadline on Friday, and the particular efficiency of a woman who had learned early that if you wanted something done in a mill town, you had to want it harder than anyone else in the room. The rental car got sideswiped in the Millstone Diner parking lot before she'd even ordered coffee. She was standing in the gravel lot, on the phone with the rental company, when a man in a gray work shirt came out of the shop bay across the street and walked over without being asked. He looked at the crumpled quarter panel, crouched down, ran 2 fingers along the crease, and said, "15 minutes if you've got them." Claire had looked at him the way city people look at someone they're about to decline. "I'll call my rental company. They'll send a tow truck in 2 hours," he said. Not unkind, just accurate. "I'm Dean. Shop's right there." His daughter was on a stool inside Carver's Body and Paint, 7 years old, red sneakers, a book open in her lap, and she glanced up when Claire walked in, assessed her the way children assess strangers, and went back to reading. Her name was Rosie, and she had her father's eyes, that same still quality, like someone who had learned a long time ago that watching carefully was more useful than talking. Dean fixed the panel in 18 minutes. He used a tool Claire didn't recognize, worked in silence except to answer one question Rosie asked him about what she was reading, and when he was done he charged her what the materials cost and nothing more. "What do I owe you for the labor?" Claire asked. "Nothing." "That's not how it works." He handed her the keys. "It is today." She drove to the plant and put him in the back of her mind, the way you file away a small, pleasant surprise that doesn't change anything. The audit was supposed to take 3 days. On the second morning, it stopped being an audit. She'd been cross-referencing the temp agency placements against the plant's proprietary database access logs, routine work, looking for compliance gaps, when she found a pattern that wasn't a gap. It was a channel. 6 temp workers, placed over 4 months by the same agency, had been accessing product formulation files in pairs, never the same pair twice, always during the maintenance window when the system logged events at lowest priority. They weren't stealing files, they were reading them and leaving nothing behind. The kind of method that took training to design. Claire called the plant's IT director. He'd never seen it. She called their parent company's security desk in Cincinnati. They said they'd have someone out by the end of the week. She called the county sheriff's office, who sent a deputy who asked her to print it out and promised to follow up. She sat in the conference room at 10 o'clock that night with a cold cup of coffee and 17 pages of access logs, and the particular feeling of a problem that was too precise to be an accident and too clean for anyone around her to touch. She went to the diner because it was the only thing still open. Dean Carver was 2 stools down, eating a late dinner, a thermos of his own coffee on the counter beside him. Rosie was not with him. It was a school night, she'd be home. And without his daughter nearby, he looked a little like a man who knew exactly where he was, but hadn't quite decided what to do about it. He had a book open beside his plate, and he was reading it the same way Rosie read hers, with full attention, as if nothing in the diner existed until he chose to acknowledge it. Claire didn't intend to say anything. She ordered coffee and stared at the counter, and then heard herself say, to nobody in particular, "Has anyone in this town ever heard of a low-priority maintenance window data pull?" Dean set down his fork. He turned and looked at her with an expression she couldn't place. Not surprise. Something more like recognition. "Which plant?" he said. She told him. He asked one more question. About the temp agency, its registered name, and she watched something move across his face that she'd never seen there before. Careful, deliberate, the look of a man sorting through a room in his head. "Can you show me the logs?" he said. She should have said no. She said yes. He drove to the plant in his truck. Rosie's booster seat was in the back, a child's drawing of a heron taped to the dashboard. He sat in the conference room in his work shirt with the logs spread across the table and went through them for 45 minutes without speaking. Then he picked up a pen and drew lines between access events, not the obvious ones, but lateral ones, connecting timestamps to IP segments to badge swipes at the loading bay, and when he was done, the page looked like a map. "There are 3 of them," he said, "not 6. 3 operators running 6 covers. The 4th placement, the one that started in February, That's the control. She's not pulling data. She's running timing for the other two. Claire stared at the page. How do you know that? Dean looked at the drawing for a moment, then at her. It's a method, he said. Someone taught it to them. He didn't say anything more that night. He said he'd need until morning. What happened in the next 36 hours, Claire would spend a long time trying to explain to people who weren't there, and mostly failing. Dean worked from the shop during the day. She could see the bay doors open through the plant's front windows, and twice she drove over to find him under a car with a phone wedged against his shoulder, talking in a voice too low to catch, while Rosie did her homework at the workbench with the focused severity of a child who understood that her father was busy in a way that mattered. The second time, he'd covered 3 whiteboards in the back office, with handwritten notes organized in a way that reminded her less of a body shop and more of a field operations room. She didn't ask. She was afraid that if she asked, he would stop. He identified the temp agency's parent company, a shell registered in Delaware, 2 layers deep, tied to an industrial intelligence firm that had run the same pattern at 4 other mid-sized manufacturers in the region over the past 18 months. He had names. He had the signature move that connected all 4 operations to a single source. He knew what kind of training produced it, and he knew where that training came from, though he didn't say so to her. He sent a 12-page summary to an address in Washington, D.C. that he typed from memory. On the morning of the 3rd day, he called her. It's done, he said. Lock out the 6 placements today. The county attorney's office will have a warrant by noon, and someone's going to come. From Cincinnati? A pause. No, he said. Not Cincinnati. The man who came was named Colonel Rutherford, retired, now head of corporate security for the plant's parent company. He drove up from Pittsburgh himself, alone, which Claire noted, because men like him usually traveled with someone. He was 60 years old, straight-backed, the kind of man who made a room adjust to him simply by entering it. He walked through the plant's front door at 2 in the afternoon, nodded at Claire, and looked around the lobby with the unhurried assessment of someone who didn't need to be told what he was looking for. Dean was in the lobby. He'd come in from the shop, still in his work clothes, hands clean but shirt stained along one cuff. He was holding a coffee cup and standing near the window, and when the colonel came through the door, he didn't move toward him or away. The colonel found him in about 3 seconds. He crossed the lobby without pausing, and put out his hand and said, Dean Carver, in the way you say a name you've carried for a while, with weight and something close to relief. Dean shook his hand. Colonel. You still licensed? The colonel said. Still licensed. The colonel nodded, the way men nod when the answer is exactly what they expected. Good. The plant manager, who had been standing beside Claire, said quietly, Do they know each other? Claire had already taken out her phone to look up what she hadn't thought to look up 3 days ago, what it meant to hold a federal investigator's license from Army CID, who was issued one, what they did to earn it. She read for a while. Then she put her phone in her pocket and looked across the lobby at Dean Carver, who was still talking quietly with the colonel, coffee cup in hand, and understood that she had been the only person in that lobby who hadn't known. She thought about the 18 minutes, the material cost, and nothing more. Rosie on her stool with her book, so accustomed to her father's competence that she barely looked up when it happened. At 4 o'clock, Claire walked out to the parking lot and found Dean at his truck, keys in hand, getting ready to pick up Rosie from school. You should have told me, she said. He looked at her steadily. You didn't ask. I wouldn't have known to ask. No, he said. Most people don't. He said it without bitterness, as a fact that had long ago stopped bothering him. I came back here when my wife got sick. Rosie needed someone steady. The shop was my dad's. It suited. He opened the truck door. It still suits. She watched him pull out of the lot and turn toward the school, the heron drawing in the window, and thought about a man who had run federal undercover operations for 6 years, been commended by the Secretary of the Army, and then come home to a town that saw a body shop and thought it knew everything worth knowing. She drove back to Pittsburgh that evening. She filed her audit. She wrote the colonel's report with more care than anything she'd written in years. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in early October, she drove back to Millstone. She didn't call ahead. She wasn't sure she would have been able to explain it properly on the phone. the thing that had been sitting with her since she'd stood in that parking lot and watched Dean Carver drive toward his daughter's school, like a man who had already made every decision that mattered and was at peace with all of them. She wasn't sure she could explain it even now. She just knew that the drive felt easy in a way the drive out had not. Carver's body and paint was open. The bay doors were wide. She could hear something on the radio and the sound of a wrench, and then Rosie came around the side of the truck in the first bay, saw the car pull up and stood still in the way she had, patient, waiting. Claire got out. Rosie looked at her and said, matter-of-factly, "He said you'd come back. Did he?" "He said some people take 6 weeks. She considered this. He didn't say it like it was bad. Dean came around from the far side of the bay, wiping his hands on a cloth. He saw her and stopped, and the expression on his face was the same one she'd first seen at the diner, that careful, deliberate recognition, but warmer now, something settled underneath it. He didn't say he was surprised. "You eaten?" he said. "Not yet." He nodded toward the diner. "Rosie likes the waffles on Saturdays." Rosie had already started across the lot, unhurried, the way a child moves when she trusts exactly where she's going. Claire looked at Dean, and Dean looked back, and the quiet of Millstone sat around them, not the impatient kind she'd arrived with, and not the kind she'd brought with her from Pittsburgh, but the kind that comes after something has been understood, and the people in it have stopped pretending they need to be in a hurry. She fell in beside them. The three of them crossed the street. In a town that had always thought it knew Dean Carver, not one person who saw them walk into that diner on a Saturday morning in October would have guessed that the steady man in the gray work shirt had once spent 6 years in the dark keeping other people safe, and that he'd made it look easy, because that was simply the kind of man he was. The kind who showed up, the kind who fixed the thing in front of him and charged what the materials cost and nothing more. The kind whose daughter knew the truth and kept it the way he'd taught her to keep everything, quietly, and with no need for it to be proved. The proof always came eventually. It had this time too.